Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what happened to me.
I have to tell you, this is always my favorite panel of the whole festival every year. Even in a year where you got Ken Starr and you got Ted Cruz and you got whomever else, John Kasich, there is no more fun panel than to do this panel. And these five especially, this is going to be absolutely great. It is my pleasure to introduce the first of our two closing keynote sessions, our now familiar, breezy conversation about the presidential race. The difference this time, of course, is that in the past, Election Day was eons away. The stakes seemed lower. It was all out in the distance. It was all speculative. Now, literally, we're fewer than 50 days away, and the stakes are huge. The panel in 2014 was really the first version of this. We called it Ready for 2016. That was a nod to the early stage Hillary Clinton organizing slogan of the time. That does seem like an eternity ago, as everything pre-Trump does. That panel had, among others, Jonathan Martin and Maggie Haberman. They were not yet colleagues at the New York Times. We talked about a more conventional, which is the same as saying a more boring, campaign narrative. We didn't have any sense what was coming. Last year, 2015, was called Make 2016 Great Again. Yeah. We were several months past Donald Trump descending on that escalator in Trump Tower. And no matter what we all set up on stage, nobody really took him truly seriously at that point. Amy Chozick of the Times was here and she recounted, I remember this like we were just doing it yesterday. She said, many of my friends in New York are still thinking about Donald Trump as a summer fling, and I have to tell them it's the fall. Well, that really reflected, I think, the mood up on the stage. On the one hand, we didn't really think this was going anyplace, but it was getting on a little bit in the process. Amy was here. Ryan Lizza of The New Yorker was here. It was a good group of four to talk about that race. We thought we knew how the race was shaping up. Little did we know. This year's panel, I struggled with what to call it, and ultimately I landed on 2016 WTF. If ever there was an election cycle better summed up by WTF, maybe we should have called it 2016 I Can't Even. That might have actually been better. But if you think about this, though, the challenge for all of us, for the five of us, for the media in general, and for the whole country over the next 45 days, whatever it is to figure out WTF happened. And WTF happens next. So here's where we are in sum, the frame for this conversation. We have the two most unpopular nominees from a major party in the history of presidential elections in this country, full stop. He may be the only one she can beat. She may be the only one he can beat. And the eventual winner will actually be a non-loser, will be the person who didn't lose. And that person will have to work really hard to claim a mandate on January 20th and to try to get enough of the country behind him or her. And that assumes even that people think the outcome is legitimate. We spent the last months undermining the credibility of the election process. So even before we get a winner, we're already questioning whether that's going to work. If he wins, Democrats may head en masse for Vancouver and Montreal, right? If she wins, Republicans may come down with a serious case of Obama nostalgia. And here in Texas, this is particularly acute. In Texas, the conservatives elected statewide, if they didn't like Obama, and they didn't, imagine what happens when Hillary Clinton's in the White House. They're all going to be standing around in January going, what happened to that nice man from Kenya? So the five great folks up here are here to help us make sense of all of this, the implications of the race. And so I'm going to introduce them quickly, and then we'll get started. Chris Cillizza right here reports and writes and enthusiastically holds forth on politics at the Washington Post, his employer for more than a decade, where he created the widely read and widely imitated blog, The Fix. You surely recognize him as the most ubiquitous MSNBC political analyst. Sometimes they go a whole 10 minutes without having him on the air. He previously spent 4 years at Roll Call, the newspaper of Capitol Hill. Before that, covered governor's races and House races at the Cook Political Report. He's a native of Connecticut and a graduate of Georgetown University. Shy retiring Marie Cox next to Chris, is the senior political correspondent for MTV News and conducts the weekly back-page interview for the New York Times Sunday magazine. She is one of the best interviewers, I think, in the country. A veteran political columnist and cultural critic, she is the creator of the political blog Wonket. She previously was Washington editor of Time, Washington correspondent for GQ, national correspondent for Air America, and the lead political blogger for The Guardian. She's also the author of a political novel, Dog Days. Born in Puerto Rico, but raised in Texas, where her family has deep roots. She is a graduate of the University of Chicago. Steve Kornacki is an MSNBC host and political correspondent, the anchor of the 4 p.m. hour of MSNBC Live, a regular guest host of Rachel Maddow's and Chris Matthews' programs, and an analyst who provides real-time data and demographic information on primary and election nights. He previously co-hosted the afternoon Millennial Kibitz Fest, The Cycle. And he was the host of the Saturday and Sunday morning show Up. In his pre-TV days, he was the politics editor of Salon.com and wrote for the New York Observer. He is a native of Massachusetts and has a degree from Boston University. J. Newton-Small, Washington correspondent for Time magazine, where she's covered the White House, Congress, and 2 presidential elections, and has also been on assignment in nearly every corner of the globe. Previously, she covered the White House and Congress for Bloomberg News. She's the author of Broad Influence, How Women Are Changing the Way America Works, published earlier this year. The child of UN diplomats, she was born in New York but grew up all over the world. She's an alumna of Tufts University and the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. Finally, I will not do this panel without him, our returning champion, Dave Weigel, who has been in that very seat on this very panel for 3 consecutive years. He's a national political correspondent for the Washington Post, a fierce cable TV talker in his own right, and a forceful presence on social media. He previously helped launch the Bloomberg Politics site as a roving reporter and spent 4 years as a reporter and podcast host for Slate. He's also written about the American conservative movement for Reason, and one of these days he'll finish his book about progressive rock.
I did finish it.
Is it done?
Next year.
Yeah. When's it coming out?
Next year.
June. All right.
Yeah.
A Delaware native, he's a graduate of Northwestern University. Go Cats. Please join me in welcoming Chris Cillizza, Marie Cox, Steve Kornacki, J. Newton-Small, and David Weigel. So, let me start with Weigel and Cillizza, only because their newspaper, the Washington Post, along with ABC News, has a poll out this very morning that shows Hillary Clinton up 2 points on Donald Trump, 49-47 among likely voters in a 2-way heat, and up 2 points, 46-44 against likely voters in a 4-way heat. So it's a 2-point race within the margin of error. The race is tied. Last week, Hillary Clinton said, "I don't know why I'm not winning by 50 points. And of course, I'm thinking of that old Saturday Night Live skit with John Lovitz as Michael Dukakis and Dana Carvey as George H.W. Bush, where Dukakis looks at the camera and he says, "I can't believe I'm losing to this guy." Why is she not winning? Why is this race tied? Everything that we thought up to this point and after the convention would have suggested this would not be where we are. What's going on?
I think she is winning. I think national polling, this race is more nationalized than most, so I think you can pay a little bit more attention to national polling than usual, but the truth of the matter is that while we have a national election, everybody votes on the same day.
It's not really a national election.
Not really. I'm from Connecticut. The last time my parents saw a candidate in the general election, other than stopping in for a fundraiser, was never. I mean, it's just not a thing. Like, I didn't grow up like, oh, look, there's a TV ad on. Mike, we live in Virginia, there's TV ads on all the time. Yeah. It's just not. So, but I say she's winning because I think that I shouldn't say she's winning. She has a lot more paths to win than he does. That is just a fact. He has essentially 3 to 4 paths to get to 270 electoral votes.
Right.
She has, depending on however many iterations you want to make of the map, 15 or 20. She has demographic advantages as well. Look, Mitt Romney got 1 in every 10 people who voted for Mitt Romney wasn't white. That was seen as a low water mark. Republican, we can't do this badly again among non-white voters. It seems unlikely. If you go and read, just for kicks, if you go and read some of the Republican autopsy, the Growth and Opportunity Project, right in the beginning is we have to find a way to get beyond immigration stuff with Hispanic voters. We have to be for comprehensive immigration reform. Obviously, the candidate who they have chosen is not of that ilk. So it's just very hard shrinking. I mean, Texas is more indicative of this than any state. Shrinking white population, booming Hispanic population. You know, the white vote will drop to 70 or below this election as a part of the overall electorate. So she has a lot of built-in advantages that will be difficult for him, put aside the national polling, to overcome.
Dave, this is Austin, Texas, home of Democratic bedwetters at times like this. You throw a rock, you'll hit somebody who is running up to journalists and saying quietly, please tell me this is not going to go badly. Can you reassure the bedwetters among us? Put away the rubber sheets, this is going to be fine?
Well, I've been telling everyone who asked me that, oh, wait till the first debate. So this panel's perfectly timed for me to not say anything.
So consequence-free speculation. We don't actually know what's going to happen.
The reason I think it is competitive is because a bet was made by Donald Trump, consciously or unconsciously, to act on something that the minority report of that autopsy report was saying in 2013, which was, you can say the white vote is declining to maybe 72%. In any other circumstance, you'd say 72% is a lot of people. And if you get a bigger majority of that vote, then you win the election. And there was, again, in the way he talked, I don't think you'll ever find like a Trump memo where he said, I'm going to do this the way that Pat Buchanan argued to Nixon that we could split the country in half and have a bigger half. He figured out that there are a lot of white voters who kind of habitually vote for Democrats and don't like the Democratic Party, which has shifted to the left. That's one narrative I think that's lost in a kind of a lot of the glibber, oh, Hillary stands for nothing coverage. She represents a very left-wing Democratic Party that's moved left on abortion, left on gay rights, left on immigration,
and Sanders in the primary pushing her to the left probably accentuated
on student loans. It's now the party where it's something that they would have rejected 40 years ago because it was scary to voters. It's the party of there are protests in the streets. We side with the protesters. There are college students making a fuss on campus. We want their tuition to be cheaper. I mean, it is a more elite party in a lot of ways and a more representative of the non-white part of the country. And Trump saying, oh, I'll get the rest of those guys then. And I think the reason he's competitive is because he's doing better with a lot of those white voters, including, that's one reason he's doing worse in Texas. But if we were having this conversation in Maine, he's doing better than any Republican since the 80s because lots of white. If you've been to Maine, it's very lovely, especially right now compared to what the soup I walked through for 3 days here. But it's very white, and it turns out a lot of white people who didn't go to college and see that TV and see people protesting cops are like, nope, and they like Trump.
Ani, you know, the fundamentals of any race like this are assumed at the beginning. We don't always see the end as what we thought was going to happen at the beginning. Leaving aside the fact that traditionally, when a party's in power for 2 terms, the next term is not won by that party. A lot of what Chris alluded to, what Dave is saying, the fundamentals were on her side going into this, right?
Yeah.
So if this was her race to lose, why is she doing such a good job of it?
I think that, you know, I think we all underestimated the appeal of white supremacy. Honestly, I mean...
You think that's it?
I think Trump's appeal is based in white supremacy. I think immigration is in a way a smokescreen for just talking shit about brown people. I think that Democrats underestimated their ability to hold on to traditionally Democratic white voters. I don't think, you know, there's sort of like this weird debate, especially on social media, about is it the economics or is it the racism? It can be both. I think Trump's appeal is based in a crisis of white privilege. There are people not necessarily poor, not necessarily struggling, but there are white people, especially white men across the country, that feel anxious about a country that has seen gay marriage become law, that elected a black man, that may elect a woman. And they may not be personally struggling in an economic sense, but they sense the decline of their social capital.
Are these new voters? These are people who've not voted
I think
before?
some of them are people who thought that they were, you know, politics wasn't something that they were interested in. They felt alienated. This is true. They felt alienated by the elitism of politics. They felt alienated by sort of the inside baseball of it. The fact that they've turned to someone who is both an outsider and yet the master of playing the game of, quid pro quo is a weird thing. Like, no, we're never going to be able to make sense of Donald Trump, I think, even after it's all over. Unless I do think this white supremacy is a sort of the key that unlocks everything, because it's the only way to understand how he can like flip-flop on everything, how he can be both an insider and an outsider, an elitist and the everyman.
Yeah.
The one constant in his campaign is to demonize or criminalize or talk down to people who aren't white. And I think that the Democrats have work to do in, it feels weird to say white outreach, but I think that the Democrats have work to do in listening to those people.
So you don't actually dismiss or disrespect the fact that those people have a grievance.
I think that the anxiety is real, even if the decline in their social capital is somewhat an illusion. I mean, I think there's still a lot of white people who are running things,
Yeah.
But I do think that the sense of anxiety is real.
Is legitimate.
And also, I mean, there was Touré's panel yesterday I thought was really great when it was supposed to be at the State of Black America, and he said, well, what about white America? Thing. And I do think that there is going to be a need to figure out how to listen to those people without empowering them.
Let me just go to Steve quickly. Steve, you're the map guy, right? I always see you in front of a map. So help me understand. I wish you had brought a map, in fact.
Well, so I drew a map once on TV. I don't know if anybody ever saw this. The board malfunctioned. I said, I'll draw the outline of the United States. And I realized then, never draw a picture of anything on television because Jimmy Fallon and others will think it looks like part of the male reproductive anatomy.
Well, it is.
Lesson learned.
In fairness, it is that kind of election. So that's actually it. We went into this race with this. This was the theory of the case going into the race. The Democrats have won the same 18 states in Washington, D.C. every election since 1992. What was supposed to be Hillary Clinton's basket of dependables, right? Yeah. These were the states that. These were the states that had been won by Clinton, Gore, Kerry, Bush, or no, Clinton, Gore, Kerry, Obama.
Yep.
So you would have to assume that any Republican to pick that lock was going to have to win a state that had been won by Clinton, Gore, Kerry, Obama. 18 states in D.C. adding up to 242 electoral votes. So we assumed that there was this starting advantage. But now all of a sudden, not so much.
There is a starting advantage, and she's going to hold most of those states. But I think that the divide that's different this time, and Dave was talking about this, I think to understand where the election is going and why we're here, it is among those white voters, the 72% of the electorate. It's the college, non-college divide. And I don't just say that in terms, I put this on Twitter a lot, and I think it gets misinterpreted. A lot of the feedback I get is, well, see, it's proof if you're more educated.
He's up by 7 points in a poll this week in Iowa,
there's the key. Yeah. It's the college, non-college divide. And you can see that in a couple of states as well. You can see it in Nevada. Again, you can see it in Nevada in two ways. One, the non-college white population. Two, people who look like they're first-time voters who have previously been on the sidelines. So take a state like Nevada, take a state like Iowa, take slices of Ohio. This is happening in Ohio. Take this even in parts of Florida. I know Florida's a more diverse state, but in parts of Florida, he's running up the score. So that's where the gains. Oh, Maine. And Maine, obviously, is a great example, especially that second congressional district. The flip side, though, is by appealing so strongly to those sorts of voters, there's a reaction. There's an equal or opposite reaction. And you see that among white voters in the suburbs. And so a state like Virginia, that was a Republican readout for generations, that Barack Obama barely flipped in 2008, it was about 4 points, held on to in 2012. And everybody says this is going to be one of the premier swing states of 2016. Now, I know Tim Kaine is running, but even without Tim Kaine, I think Virginia is probably off the map right now because Northern Virginia is so far gone for a candidate like Donald Trump. Take a state like Pennsylvania. The Republicans have been dreaming of flipping Pennsylvania, for the past generation or so. And Trump was thinking of those rural voters, and he's doing really well with them. But the gap he's facing in the Philadelphia suburbs is so enormous right now. Right. It's not going to make up for the gains he's making. So that's.
You mean the cheating? The cheating that will happen in Pennsylvania.
Well, it's rigged.
Rigged.
Jump in there. I want to give Jay.
Let me just say Can I say one quick thing, Jay, about his point? I wasn't looking at my phone just because I was bored. I was looking during Steve's.
No, you were bored.
I mean, I was, but I was checking on various. No, I was looking at it because this, to your point, in the Washington Post ABC's poll this morning, Romney won white men without a degree by 30.
I was going to talk about women, yeah.
He's up 76-17 right now in our poll among white men without college degrees. Well, Sorry, Jay, thank you.
Women is obviously the other very significant group that was assumed to be a slam dunk for Secretary Clinton.
Right. And so so women have swung every election since Ronald Reagan, right? We make up 53% of the electorate. In presidential elections, we actually vote on average 10% more than men do. And so you have to some degree, appeal to women. And really what Donald Trump is looking at here is trying to get white women, particularly, and he's actually sort of losing them. I mean, I think, Chris, you had a poll at the end of May. He was 47% amongst white women. This is a group that Romney won by 9 percentage points, white women. They've always gone Republican, and the idea that Donald Trump might be losing white women, he makes it up with white men. So overall, he's still in the same place where Romney was at this point in the election overall amongst whites, but it's because he's doing so poorly with white women, that's how it balances out. And so what you see in the campaign trail and the fight really right now, to me, is all about women, right? So Donald Trump going to Detroit to talk to black voters, he's not really, I mean, if he gets a couple of black voters, that's kind of great, but he's not really trying to win the black vote. He's trying to reassure suburban white women that he is not racist because they don't like the idea of voting for a racist, that he's not, xenophobic, that he's not a white supremacist. And so he's trying to show them look, black people are my friends. Black people like me. I'm okay. And
here's my African American.
Here's my African American people. And so conversely, Hillary's sort of basket of deplorables was an attempt to drive a wedge between independent white women and Donald Trump, because basically she's saying to those white women, do you really want to be in that same basket as all those racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, anti-gay, anti-everything people? Are you one of those people, right? And Kellyanne Conway is, one of the best Republican strategists for women out there. I mean, she wrote a book 10 years ago with Celinda Lake called What Women Want. She's very savvy with the women's vote, and she's very good at turning around Donald Trump's worser instincts when it comes to women. So Jennifer Flowers, who's supposed to go to the debate.
And now it turns out, breaking news this morning, Jennifer Flowers will not be at the debate.
And that's totally Kellyanne Conway making the calculation that no suburban housewife wants to see, Hillary Clinton facing her husband's former mistress in the front row of the debate, because that's just going to piss him off. So Kellyanne Conway is very smart when it comes to figuring out what is going to anger and appeal to these sort of white suburban women. And really the fight comes down to, if Donald Trump can raise his numbers with white suburban women, if he can get those independent white women on board with him and get above sort of 50, 60%, then he could that's the one demographic that can push him over.
Everybody on the panel has been out to some degree observing this campaign up close. So let me ask anybody who wants to jump in on this, is Hillary Clinton as bad a campaigner as has become an article of faith in this campaign?
No,
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think Jennifer Palmieri, one of her spokespeople, said something kind of plaintively that I feel like is fair, which is she will give a speech. Her typical speech is 20 to 30 minutes. It's mostly policy. It's specific policy. It's a little bit of broad themes about America, but more specific than we're used to in a presidential campaign. And then she'll put in a dig at Trump, a couple digs at Trump. Maybe he said something that day she responds to. And if you read, especially the local coverage, it is, if she talked 95% about something else, so 5% is the story. Clinton hits Trump, et cetera. Yeah. And often the video of her hitting Trump is that's the part where she gets to use the most coded word, shrill. right? That's the part where she is punching her arm and making a hard point.
And that's fundamentally a problem with women in general. And you have to separate out Hillary Clinton's own sort of weaknesses from women in general. So women face a different test when running for executive office.
You think there's a double standard? This was Anna's point last night, actually, that maybe we're not regarding everybody in the same way.
I mean, this is something, when I interviewed Hillary for my book, she talked about it. I mean, she talked about this double standard for executive office versus legislative office. So it's much easier, she told me, to run for the Senate than it was to run for executive office, because all of the women, the natural sort of women's assets, the idea that you're very good at consensus building and win-win scenarios, actually disqualifies you from running for executive office, because we perceive executive office, you have to be stronger at win-lose scenarios, zero-sum games, and decision-making with very little input from others. And so women face a capability test that they do not face for any other office when they run, and that's very hard to show that you're capable without crossing over the line to becoming too tough and becoming a bitch, right? And so and so women often have, and so this is, so there's a lot of limitations that female candidates have in particular, and again, Hillary has her own set of like issues apart from this that are very different from from what Donald Trump would face. And I'm just gonna finish the thought, when people say she's shrill, Bernie Sanders can yell at you for like 40 minutes, and you're like, yeah, yell at me for 40 more, and Hillary Clinton gets up, and the minute she raises her voice, everyone's like, oh my God, why is mom yelling at me? You know what I mean? It's like totally freaking out. And so and it's this, and that is a double standard that we expect powerful executive women to be pragmatists, but it's very hard for them to show passion. So all female leaders in the world today, Angela Merkel, Theresa May, even Margaret Thatcher, these are pragmatic women who it's very hard for them to soar, it's very hard for them to inspire, and that's again another test that women face that's very different and difficult.
Anna, I know this is a good topic for you. Go ahead.
Well, it's because it's not just the double standard of whether or not she sounds shrill, it's the double standard of coverage that Dave pointed out, which when someone last night said, if only Hillary had come out with some really, solid policy proposals, maybe we'd be talking about that.
Oh, you can say who it was.
Maureen Dowd. I don't know what election she was watching. It disturbs me that someone who works for the paper of record would say such a thing, because if you've been following the election beyond what's on cable news, I mean, Hillary Clinton has some of the most detailed and ambitious policies that I've ever seen. She put out an entire policy, a cause that's dear to my heart, on mental health issues that no other presidential candidate has ever put out. A set of policy points that addresses the mental health crisis in America specifically. And you know what we covered that week? I think it was Basket of Deplorables. I mean, she wants to have that conversation, and she'll spend 95% of the speech having that conversation, and I'll take some of it, just don't cover it, and instead, we get the mugging and the word salad of Donald Trump, and it is infuriating. I do think that people in the media need to examine themselves when we try to make this a horse race about them, tossing barbs at each other, when really it's a contest between someone who has policy proposals and ideas and someone who just, has tasted his own foot for his entire life. I mean, well, let's visit the sins of this coverage on Kornacki, because Kornacki, I'm going to make Kornacki own this. I mean,
that's good.
I'm leaving you out of it. You're just an analyst.
Right.
Yes, Steve. Let me draw some pictures.
What Anna is describing is
everything I hear in my Twitter feed
I have
all
no
day,
doubt.
every day.
So Secretary Clinton gives a speech, Trump gives a speech, you all will cover the Trump speech because the Trump speech is more likely to have entertainment value than the Clinton speech.
Well, okay, you all means cable news here, or?
It can be MSNBC, or I can visit the sins of the whole genre.
Honest to God, one of my biggest pet peeves in all of this has been the media.
That's fair.
Okay, talk about that. That's good.
Well, let's start with this. One of the critics, I'm a shameless apologist for the media and all of this, so I'll start by saying that, and this is where I draw my paycheck, so you can say that I'm blind to it, or I'm bought and paid for, or whatever else I hear on Twitter all the time. I look at the question of media coverage a couple different ways. The first thing is there's an assumption that the relationship is very one way in terms of voters and media, very broadly defined media. That is, the media says something and the voters then are indoctrinated. That seems to be the assumption here, and I think the relationship is very, very different. And here's what I mean by that. I'm thinking back to the early days of Donald Trump's campaign. Now, did MSNBC and did other cable news outlets play Donald Trump's announcement speech, his early speeches on the campaign trail? Well, lots of his speeches on the campaign trail. Yes, absolutely. What was the coverage, though? Because I've gone back and looked at this. I know cable news takes a lot of heat. What was the coverage, the volume of coverage when Donald Trump gave that announcement speech and he talked about Mexicans being raped? You know exactly what he said. It was intensely critical. The reaction, now we played the speech, but the reaction on our network and the reaction I saw on just about every other network I watched, and this is something that's been repeated for more than a year now, was this is a comment we've never heard a major credible presidential candidate make before. And the coverage at the time, when you go back and look at it, a couple things were going on. Number one, our poll, our NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, which had been finished 2 days before Donald Trump made that speech, had Donald Trump at 1% when he gave that speech. He was at 1%. The RNC had just announced its rules for the debates, 10 spots on stage, top 10 poll positions. We had a segment that morning said Donald Trump right now is in danger of missing the debate stage. He may not even be in the top 10. That was the context for Donald Trump for making those comments. And all sorts of criticism and grief rained down on him, and I'm not saying unjustifiably for saying that. What I went back and looked at, though, too, was, I say the media, and this is what I mean. How did it play out in conservative media? How did it play out to Republican voters, conservative voters, people in red America who maybe don't watch MSNBC, maybe don't watch CNN. Maybe if they do watch CNN, if they do watch MSNBC, they sort of have the attitude my dad used to have about Ted Kennedy. If Ted Kennedy was for it, my dad was against it. Okay? How many people in red America, if they hear it on MSNBC, they don't believe it because it's on MSNBC? If MSNBC, it could be any cable network or any media outlet, but if it's a media outlet that is perceived to be part of not my political tribe and they're criticizing somebody, then I like that person. And I say that because I went back and I looked at Rush Limbaugh. And Limbaugh, I'm using him as a stand-in here. I know conservative media is a lot more complicated than just Rush Limbaugh. I'll use him as a stand-in here because I want to keep as brief as I can. What was Rush Limbaugh's reaction in that week, in that 2 weeks? It was this. It was, so look at what the media, look at what the cable news, look at what broadcast news is doing to Donald Trump right now. They're doing to him what they do to every conservative Republican you've ever voted for, ever supported, ever liked. What's the difference? The difference is he's not playing their game. He's not apologizing. He's not backing down. He's throwing it right back in their face. And that is when Donald Trump moved from 1 to 12% in the polls. That was the next poll. And then after that, from 12 to 22%. I don't think it was because mainstream media outlets were giving him coverage or were giving him fawning treatment. I think it was a reaction to how he was portrayed in the mainstream media.
I just want to add one thing. Yeah. Feel free to clap for Steve. I don't want to I don't want to trample on Steve's applause. The one thing I would say, while we're airing pet peeve grievances, one of the things that I will say I know Dave and I, just working at the Post, one of the things that I get all the time, people in forums like this, on Twitter, at people I run into on the street, they always say roughly the same thing. Why don't you fact check Donald Trump's falsehoods? To which I literally want to climb up to the 12th floor of the Post building and jump off, because I send them, I'm like, give me your email. I mean, I've done this. Give me your email address. I will send you what we have done. What is difficult, and this is sort of, I thought what Steve was saying made me think exactly of it. The fact that MSNBC is critical of Donald Trump, it doesn't matter what Donald Trump thinks or who he is. Some people will like him just because of that. We would say to people, 75% of the things that Donald Trump has said that we have fact-checked are false. Yep. We have fact-checked more Donald Trump statements than any other candidate by a long shot. He also talks more than most of the other candidates. That question, what is inherent in or what I think people mean in the question of why don't you fact-check him more, is not that we don't fact-check him. It's why does the fact that 75% of what he says is false not change more people's minds? Yeah. Like, how can you be for someone, right? And that's what's difficult from my perspective, because it's like people have two totally contradictory ideas about the media. On the one hand, we're powerless parasites for one side or the other, typically, and the other were all powerful and should be able to make people believe these things that we were telling them. So it's just very frustrating for me because it's like we are doing, and I'm not saying the media is, because I know Anna is readying this, so I'm going to pre-butt her. I'm not saying that the media is blameless, but I will say in some cases, particularly as it relates to Trump, I think there is a sense of, like, we have fallen down in our responsibility because there are a lot of people who are for him. And it's like, we are doing, go and look at Glenn Kessler and Michelle Lee's blog. They have literally a gigantic thing of things we fact-checked.
And Anna, it's not just the fact check.
Right.
I mean, this is the campaign, the one headline from this campaign season I'm convinced is this is the election cycle when lies stopped mattering.
Right. And I guess what I would say is that the reason the fact checks don't matter is it's because you can't make people unracist. Like, you can't.
I just think that's oversimplified.
No, I mean,
everyone who supports him is a racist.
No, but I think no. I use this. Racist is a strong word. But I guess what I mean is I do go back to the fact that the facts don't matter to them because he speaks to something more fundamental than facts to them. He speaks to something angrier and more anxious than. So
even if you go,
you're conflating. I do think it is dangerous to conflate anxiety with racism.
I don't.
Okay.
I think that you can have. Racist is such a bad word. To call someone racist is so terrible. In fact, that's kept the media from calling Trump racist. When I do think. I don't know if he, in the bottom of his heart, finds, black and brown people hateful, but he certainly says racist things. He advocates racist policies. He is an avatar for a form of white supremacy. So I think but I think there's actually been a problem with the media. They don't want to call people racist because you can't call people racist because that's such a strong word. I want to get to something else about this, which is that something that Steve said about the coverage, which is that you said, he said something, when he said the thing about Mexicans, the coverage was, we've heard something from no other credible candidate has ever said.
A presidential candidate had never lumped together a giant group of people and said they're rapists. Yeah.
And I think the problem in that sort of description when we were talking was say credible candidate. Because I think that in a way, the greatest trick Trump ever pulled was to convince us he's a credible candidate, that he has a campaign. Because as we all know, sitting on the stage, he has the most bare infrastructure of an actual campaign that we've ever seen at this level, right? In terms of people on the ground, in terms of what kind of staff he has, in terms of how much advertising he does. He doesn't have a traditional campaign structure. And it took him for a long time to give him one. And what happened is the media gave him a campaign structure. They treated him.
This is what I mean about how it's not I don't think it's a one-way relationship because between media and voters. Here's a perfect example. The question of racism. And I hear this all the time. The mainstream media is afraid to call out Donald Trump. It's in the fact check. Put it in your headline of every story you write about him. New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN. It's generally directed at these outlets. Generally, it's coming from the people who consume those outlets, who read those outlets, who consume them. What did we just talk about in terms of that college, non-college divide among white voters? Donald Trump is doing something that a Republican candidate for president has never done before. He is losing white suburbanites. He is losing the consumers of the Washington Post, the New York Times, MSNBC, CNN. He is losing those consumers. There was a poll out the other day that asked voters broadly, do you consider Donald Trump a racist? 51% said yes. Among the group that I'm talking about, white college-educated suburbanites who read the New York Times, who read the Washington Post, who watch CNN, that number is much, much higher. The people who consume the kind of news that the complaints about coverage are directed to are overwhelmingly against Donald Trump right now. The issue is, are people outside of that world receiving that coverage differently, and is it encouraging them to support him? And also, again, all the criticisms that come to MSNBC are, hey, the New York Times did 12 column inches on Hillary and only did 24 on Trump. All of that criticism. Look at conservative outlets that are out there that aren't even on anybody's radar.
I want to get back to this idea that treating him as a credible candidate, because it is this, the media gave him kind of a box of a campaign that he filled then with all the shit he has to say. And one of the things that happened is to treat him like a credible candidate, things like the wall and his immigration policies and the anti-Muslim ban. Well, we talked about those as racist, which they were. The other thing is that we treated them like real policies, which they're not.
Support for the wall has dropped 12 points since he became a candidate.
Well, that's
Right.
right.
But we treated it as though it was something you could even do, which I think is, we debated the intelligence of it as a policy, and we didn't sort of make clear, which I think is something that would have an impact maybe on those non-educated white voters, that it's fucking impossible to do. Like, that it's not, he's promising you unicorns.
Let me let Dave get in and
Yeah.
then Jay, and then we're going to actually have people line up and we'll have questions from the audience to add to this conversation for the balance of our time. So if you've got questions, begin to line up. Let me go Dave and then Jay.
Well, I was going to say media and institutions do have a role, and our kind of A/B test in this race was the Wisconsin Republican primary, because Wisconsin is a very unique state where the conservative media and the conservative foundations, like the Bradley Foundation, the Olin Foundation, were anti-Trump for a long time. If you drove a truck, if you were a plumber and you were listening to conservative drive talk radio, you thought, if you were in Illinois, you heard Donald Trump was an amazing talent like it is. If you were in Milwaukee, you were hearing Donald Trump's a joke. Not even that someone else was so great, but Donald Trump was a fraud, and Donald Trump tanked among the Republican voters there. He's still that's still a state where he's underperforming. I think there's one poll where he's not, but he's still a state where he's running behind where he should be nationally. And that is where a media diet and a series of institutions try to define what conservatism is in a more realist way, and where they have this model of Scott Walker where they say, see, this works, not the fantasy he says. I would just add to that, though, the problem is nationally, and in the Republican Party nationally, the infrastructure has rewarded nihilism about how government works, and I think, I don't want to say xenophobia, but sort of indulging it if you think the problem is everybody else. If you think that I can't get a job because of these policies giving resources to other people. They endorsed a sort of nihilism about policy in the other 49 states where Trump did quite well. And that's not something that any one news outlet could change. Like, that's why there's one state where the media was a little bit more responsible in what it said, how you should vote, how government should work, even from the right. And the rest of the media is, this idea sounds crazy, but they will always say our ideas sound crazy. He's saying he wants to blow up this part of the government, but we want to blow up every part of the government? And it was just like the idea that you could do that for decades, and then Jeb Bush could say, okay, thanks for being so angry about how government's failing you. Please vote for the responsible adult who's going to streamline. No, we told him to blow it up. How are we supposed to do that?
Jay.
I agree with Dave, what he says about the nihilism and the Republican Party's problems. I mean, you see this certainly in Congress, and I think part of the media problem here and part of the is essentially the disruption, right? We're in the middle of this massive, like once in every 500 years, Gutenberg style, like massive disruption in how we consume news, how we consume information, how we live our lives with our smartphones and everything else. And people want these instantaneous gratifications, right? They want these instantaneous results, whether it's voting for Dancing with the Stars on television or other reality TV shows, or whether it's,
we have a little bit of experience at the moment with Dancing with the Stars. You're striking a chord with this audience.
But that has come up against the sort of immutable force of the government, right? So our founding fathers built our government to not turn on a dime, because the idea of rapid change to them was akin to tyranny. So everything in our government is built into a system of checks and balances that makes it incredibly difficult to move, and very rapidly. Barack Obama says it's like turning an aircraft carrier. You can't do it at once. It has to happen in incremental degrees. Every president for the last 6 presidents has tried to cut departments of the government, none successfully. The only one who's actually managed to do anything about that is George W. Bush, who added a branch of the government with the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11. Like, changing the bureaucracy, anything that you want to do in government has to get all 3 branches of the government on board, and that is very, very difficult, right? So there is no rapid change, and yet Republicans for the last 3 cycles, from 2010, 2012, 2014, have promised this rapid change. They've said, we're gonna repeal Obamacare, we're gonna impeach Obama, we're gonna do all these things. That is not achievable by majorities in either houses.
Think about Donald Trump saying, on day 1, I'm going to fix this problem, right?
Yeah.
Or on day 1, I'm going to fix that problem. It just doesn't seem
Yeah,
possible.
There's nothing that's possible, like in this case. The only thing they can do is eat their own, and that they have done successfully, right? Like they've deposed John Boehner, they potentially will depose Paul Ryan, they've deposed Jeb Bush and all of their leaders. I mean, the only thing they can do is that's the change they can.
And that was quickly a depressing thing about the election was Ted Cruz, who you interviewed here yesterday, he opened his speeches often by saying executive orders he would undo or sign on the first day in office, which is a thing a president can do. That's a thing you can actually promise voters. It's concrete, it's how government works. And people didn't care. They were like, yeah, but that guy's talking about building a wall. That's cooler than I'm going to undo this accord.
Right. All right, let's take as many as we have time for. And then I'm going to ask one last question of everybody before we go, because Weigel put something on Twitter. I'm just warning you.
Oh, God.
I'm warning you. I'm going to make you all answer something because Weigel promised what you would do. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, my name's Allison Thompson. I'm a resident of Austin. I'm a professor at community college. I've got 2 kids. My kids are 9 and 6. They don't understand Trump. I'm a news junkie. I grew up in New Jersey. My 6-year-old son with the wall, he's like, duh, airplanes. Like my 6-year-old son sees through the nonsense, and you call dog whistle. That's the border wall thing is a dog whistle, and we grew up. We're 250 miles from Mexico, so that's close to them. So is intellect dead? What's happening here? I mean, my kids are smart. Smarter than this, and they're young, and we've been watching. And Steve, you mentioned Trump was 1% with the racist comment, and he didn't fit into the boxes of 10. So why pay him any mind if he was 1%?
Chris,
his rise is largely a couple things. One is what Steve talked about, and then 2 other things that happened. One is he realized he had something with the wall, which I'm not sure he realized right at the start. But whatever he is, whatever you think he is, what he is quite good at is reading audience. I compare him to a stand-up comedian. Like at this point, what you're seeing is like the greatest hits of a stand-up comedian. Like he's not there aren't any clunkers. Because he's giving you, all politicians do this to some extent, he does it more. He's giving you exactly what he knows will succeed. So the wall was one. The other one was, remember when San Bernardino in Paris happened?
Torture.
And, right, San Bernardino in Paris, Jeb Bush says, it's a time for serious politicians. What happens? Donald Trump says, we need to ban Muslims from entering the country. A proposal that was, we wrote about this, marginally might be unconstitutional, and also to Anna's point about some of the things, like if you want to say people from Italy can't enter the country, like okay, problematic. I'm Italian, but you could enforce that theoretically, right? Because they have an Italian passport, right? There is not a Muslim passport that.
Right.
But my point is. Both of those times, I remember distinctly people who worked for Rubio, who worked for Jeb, who worked for Christie, who worked for Walker. They would call me up. I'm sure they called everyone on the stage. They would call me. This is the moment. He has finally done it to himself. Yeah. What happened? Those are his 2 big moments. Right. And so it touches on, to your point, I have a 7 and a 4-year-old. It touches on.
Are they smarter than Trump?
I don't know. 50% of them is my genes, so maybe not. My wife is pretty smart, though. What it touches on, though, is I don't agree with Anna's full assessment. I agree with parts of what she says. I don't agree with all of it, though. She and I have known each other for a long time. I think we're comfortable disagreeing.
Yes.
But he has touched off something that is much more. Her point about this is exactly right, in my opinion. Much less intellectual, which is the way you are dealing with it. Yeah. Like, well, the wall cost $25 billion. Like, it seems unlikely Mexico is going to pay $25 billion for it. And more visceral.
People don't
anxiety,
care.
Anxiety, chaos, those are not things. Anxiety is not something you I struggle with anxiety. It's not something I reason out of myself. I know it's dumb. Right. I know. When I used to go on TV, I would feel super anxious, but I couldn't be like, it's fine, you've done it before. It's not how it works. It's emotional, and I think that's what you need to understand. Sorry.
It's okay. I'm struggling with anxiety now, actually.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm worried that I'm not going to get to Touré, and then he's going to be mad.
Yeah.
So, okay. And we know what happens when Touré gets mad. We've been here this weekend. Okay, go ahead.
I find the media coverage increasingly more poll-driven, so I'll share one.
Poll-driven?
Poll-driven. excuse my Pittsburgh accent.
That's okay. It could have been pool-driven.
Pool-driven could go in a lot of different
That's
directions.
right.
Yeah.
Nicholas Christoph's shared this morning's New York Times interesting statistics regarding you all, and that is that 6% of Americans have strong confidence in what the press has to say. So
6%.
6%, that's his statistic. So are there mornings that you wake up and wonder why you still have a job? But my serious question has to do with the truth, and that is this false equivalency that we see regarding which presidential candidate has the loosest relationship with the truth.
Steve, there are days that I think 6% is a pretty good number.
We're all on stage.
Yeah.
Everyone who thinks the media is working is
Right.
actually
And people
all
were related
6%
to
of us in the country are up here.
At least some of them.
Actually, I voted
But
differently.
has the media played a role in that false equivalency? Is it just that we expect men to lie, but when a woman lies, it's just not right?
Let me ask cable TV McGillicuddy over here.
This is great.
If false equivalency is the problem.
No, I don't. Listen, I think, and again, I think this gets to where the criticism, the people who are, what I always say to people who sort of size up the situation like this, I say, you've managed to sift through all this coverage that's out there. You've managed to sift through cable news playing more of Trump's speeches over the last year than Hillary Clinton's. You've managed to sift through all of the false equivalents that you see in every story out there, and yet you've sized Donald Trump up to be an absolutely objectionable, unqualified figure, and Hillary Clinton to be vastly, vastly preferable to Donald Trump. And a lot of people have consumed all of this news, have consumed all of this coverage, and made that determination in the face of all of the criticisms that are out there. And I don't say this as a way of exonerating the media from any specific criticism, any specific point. We make mistakes all the time. I make mistakes all the time. I draw things on maps constantly. So I'm saying that not to absolve the media of every criticism that might be out there, but big picture, do I think that Donald Trump is competitive in this presidential race right now because of what is put out there about false equivalence? No, I don't think that's what it is. Do I think that Donald Trump, when you take a poll right now and it says, which candidate do you consider more honest and trustworthy? And I think the most recent one was Trump 41, Clinton 34.
Yeah, he's ahead. He's
the
ahead.
most recent one I saw.
Yeah.
Do I think that's because there's been insufficient fact-checking? Do I think it's because people are not broadly speaking aware that would not broadly speaking define Donald Trump as a charlatan? No. You know what I think it is? I think a lot of people look at Donald Trump and they say, how could somebody that offensive be dishonest? I think they are making a broad judgment that a guy who's willing to go up there and say Mexicans coming into this country are raped, to make statements like that, and then you turn around and say, well, on page 26 of his charities report, it's two different levels that people are operating. The kind of dishonesty that people are ascribing to Hillary Clinton is the dishonesty that they see in lawyers. It's somebody who is overly legalistic in how they speak, especially when it comes to the emails. It's somebody who they suspect whatever promise they're making comes with fine print because the promise is put out in a way that's like it's written by a lawyer. Donald Trump is speaking in a way we haven't had candidates speak before. Some people just look at him and say he's a liar. A lot of people do. A lot of people, I think, say, yeah, the guy is kind of a con man, but big picture, this guy is telling it like it is. I think that's what that's all about.
Whereas I would say if he's willing to say those racist things, I don't care what else he has to say.
Well, and
I'm not saying that's an unreasonable point.
And that's 50% of the country.
Right. And I want to say something about we talk about false equivalency. I'm really glad that that's become a thing that people recognize and talk about in this election. I wonder if maybe the problem is, in addition to false equivalency, is the fact that American media has for so long pretended that lack of bias was the thing that they were aiming for. And people could see that it was biased in some ways, one way or another, and therefore decided not to trust the media at all. Like, you're pretending not to be biased. I know you're biased. I'm not going to trust anything you have to say. And false equivalency is a form of pretend lack of bias. So I think that, in some ways, what has happened, what that has meant is the media, there is no such thing as the media anymore, in part because there was reactions within the media to this pretend, fetishization of bias, what then happened was you had the left and the right break out their own media that also insisted they weren't really biased. And what they were doing is telling you the truth. The left is what I'm doing is telling you the truth. The right is what I'm doing telling you the truth. So we have at least 3, but probably a dozen different versions of the truth.
Good. Sir.
Right.
Hi, my name is Vic Scherviker. I'm a student here at UT Austin. And in 2008 and 2012, we heard a lot about how Obama won because of this silent majority. that, maybe his voters on average weren't as vocal, but were greater in number. And this cycle, there's definitely a sort of social stigma against openly supporting Trump to at least some extent. So do you give any credence to this idea that there's a silent majority out there that stands with Trump?
Dave, I wonder about that. I wonder if the polls that we see are actually wildly inaccurate because there are a bunch of unlikely voters, the kind of people who we assume exist but never really show up at the polls, who will show up this time for him.
We didn't see much of that in the primaries, and I think Steve could, I want to put him on the spot, but Steve is more likely to know about this than any other person on earth. States where we've tracked new voter registration, Democratic areas have had more voter registration, and not just Democratic, like old blue-collar Democratic, but like Wake County, where the University of North Carolina is in North Carolina, the Philadelphia suburbs, which have been trending blue. There's been more Democratic registration there because Hillary Clinton had this it's the kind of thing she's made fun of, this very meticulous, we're going to have to grind this out, we have to be ready in case of disaster campaign of registering people, where Trump was betting on people just kind of showing up out of passion. So there was some of that in the primaries, but not much. If you look back to what the primaries predicted, that was basically right. I don't see evidence that there were probably people who were registered independent who couldn't vote in some states, but not a lot. And at the same time, you're seeing polls in states like Colorado, in Nevada, that pollsters still worry that they're underestimating Latino voters, because they did in the last couple elections. There are people who that pollster starts talking English, they hang up. So I don't think that's as much a problem. I think one thing Democrats are worried about, though, is Hillary's whole theme is that there should be like a popular front against Trump. That this is so offensive, and indeed 60% of voters say he's so offensive, that there should be a rallying to her, and that might be the silent majority. And there's a worry that people might see her as just as bad, so they vote third party. And that is a factor that didn't exist in 2012. That it's a factor that exists for the moment now. I think we might have seen that change in the last couple of days because just to tack on clumsily a point I wanted to make the last time, I think one of the media's biases was that Hillary was covered as the likely next president and Trump was covered as a goofy joke who wasn't going to win, to the extent where a month ago you could still read speculative stories like, what if Trump just decides to quit the race? That seems like a thing he would do after giving up his business empire.
Remember when we were literally having a conversation about Trump getting out of the race?
Yes, and that was the media. John Oliver, who I think has done a lot of good work, kind of treating him like, we just need to point out that he's a joke, people are going to drift away. I think you see less of that, so I think there might be a uneasy majority an uneasy vote around the edge that goes from thinking this can't happen to this can. I think that's more likely than the secret Trump voter, because frankly, the most examined voter in this election is the trucker hat tattooed white guy who voted for Trump. The least examined is the 16 million. You don't have a trucker hat. That's a totally different.
You don't have a trucker hat on. Right.
The least examined is
Anna is holding
16
up the
million people who vote for Hillary Clinton this time,
So
17 million who vote for the primary last time. Like, the black woman who loves Hillary Clinton never gets profiled. The Trump voter is profiled in every magazine with, like, interview, Andy Warhol-style photography. Jill Greenberg showing up to shoot the decrepit town he lives in. I think we know those voters. We see where they're coming from pretty well, more than we see the voters who are really offended and might turn at the last minute for Hillary.
All right, I'm going to disappoint the people in line because we are, in fact, out of time. But Weigel promised on Twitter as we walked out here that we would tell you who's going to win the election.
Can I do a Trump and say, I never said that. I never said that. I never said that.
I have a screen grab of your tweet.
Russians did that.
Who's going to win the election? Don't say Gary Johnson.
Hillary Clinton will win. I think it'll be the Obama states minus Iowa, maybe minus Ohio, minus the district in Maine. But I'm a demography is destiny guy, and I think for Democrats it's close to how they could blow it with the white vote, but I think they have enough to grind it out. And I think that if we in the media cover Trump as a legitimate president in the debates, we will have failed. I just think that. Sorry, that's my bias. He doesn't have the policy acumen.
We're going to lower, in all likelihood, lower the bar.
The best thing going into this debate for Hillary Clinton, I'm talking too much, I apologize. I didn't think anything could lower expectations for her, and then she got pneumonia. And now she's like, fewer voters think she has an advantage in this debate than thought that about Obama over Romney.
As long as she stands up for 90 minutes, without falling down, she's fine, right? Jay, who's going to win the election?
I think if the election were held now, it would be Hillary Clinton. And I just organizationally don't understand Trump, as Anna said.
He doesn't really have a campaign.
She has double the number of offices in the state of Ohio, than he has national staff, that he has staff, period. I mean, it's kind of amazing to me. Like, she has like hundreds, like thousands of people who work for her. He has like 82. And so I don't get that at all. But I also think there'll be an October surprise. I think there'll be emails that'll come from Russians, or there'll be some terrorist attack. And
so we don't know.
We don't know. But like, if it were held today, Hillary Clinton.
Steve?
Yeah, I think, look, you say it's the two least liked candidates in history, and what I'm not convinced of yet is that there isn't a sort of critical mass of voters who think they're both unlikable, but that Donald Trump is fundamentally objectionable. And I think that is imposed. I've seen it so far in the polls. It's imposed a ceiling on him. There's 9 polls in the month of September that had her 48% or higher. There were 0 that had Donald Trump 48% or higher. So right now, I think there's a ceiling there, and I'm not convinced that doesn't exist.
Anna?
Yeah, I mean, barring something very, very, out of our vision, I think it's going to be Hillary. I think she probably could collapse on stage and still be conceived of as a more, capable commander-in-chief than Donald Trump. I think I would vote for the Weekend at Bernie's version of her over Donald Trump personally. Like, she could be carried around by Tim Kaine, and I'd be like, them. I do think that if it starts to get closer, you might see some really unexpected endorsements come out for her. I think, we heard a rumor that HW said he was going to vote, the Kathleen Kennedy Townsend.
Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, it was reported, but it's never been confirmed.
Right, but then he told the board of Points of Light, 40 people in a room.
Right, yeah, it's not been confirmed.
Right, and he didn't, but they didn't bat it down.
Yeah.
They said it's a private vote, he's going to make his own decision. I think we might start to see some leading conservative Republicans start to come out and try and seal the deal.
Well, if it looks close a couple of weeks before.
Yeah, I think that you're going to see some really unexpected endorsements.
Chris?
Okay, I'm in the Steve Kornacki group in terms of, if you look at everything that I know about politics, she should win, right? Demographics, the map, advertising, organization, level of staff, message to the extent he had, all of those things.
Yep.
If we did a generic thing and I said, okay, well, one candidate has 82 offices in Florida and one has 1 in Sarasota, who do you think is going to win? Okay, so that. At the same time, and I wrote about this and was loudly wrong, every single thing that I knew about politics suggested someone who had the profile of Donald Trump, who was saying the things that Donald Trump said, way outside the mainstream of conservative or liberal thought. I mean, I remember I'd get questions like, who's more conservative, Donald Trump or Ted Cruz? I was like,
really?
Ted Cruz is up 100, I'm not convinced Donald Trump is a conservative.
No, he's not.
He's
or even a Republican.
He's outside of every sort of way in which someone like me has tried to think about the election. I say all that to say I never, ever, ever thought he would be the Republican nominee. And I would bet everyone in this room, if you're being honest, there's no way, and everyone on TV who says that they've thought of it, there's no way in hell they knew it.
Nobody did.
So I think she should win based on everything I know. Based on everything I know, there was no way in hell he would have gotten to the point where we are 44 days away talking about him in Iowa. Or do you know what I mean? Like doing an assessment of his chances. So given all that, I'm a little gun shy to be like, well, all these standard operating procedures that someone like me uses to analyze elections all point to her. That means she's going to win. I think she should win. I don't know if we are in an extra political time, that this exists outside of the continuum of everything that we've studied. And there isn't a like, things are, the past is predictive of the present and the future until it's not anymore.
It's not.
And I don't know if that's where we are.
All right.
Got to end there. Great to be with these 5. Give them a big hand.